You know, when you think about a machine, like let's say a massive diesel-powered tractor,
Mm.
or maybe a heavy-duty crane, or even just a locomotive.
Right, heavy industrial machinery.
Yeah, exactly. You usually assume that the machine itself is, well, completely neutral.
Right.
Like, you figure that if you can just manage to climb your way up into the driver's seat and grab the steering wheel, you can basically drive that machine wherever you want to go.
Because the assumption is that the apparatus is just a passive tool.
Right.
It supposedly functions identically regardless of the ideology or the background or, the intent of the person pulling the levers in the cabin.
Exactly. You want to go left, you turn left. You want to go right, you turn right. The machine doesn't care who is driving it. It just responds to the inputs.
But imagine a scenario where you finally fight your way into that driver's seat.
You've won the battle.
Right, you've won, you grab the controls, and you suddenly realize the steering wheel is actually hardwired to only turn right.
Oh, wow.
And the brakes. The braking system only responds to the specific biometric fingerprints of the people who originally built the machine.
So you literally can't steer it.
You can't steer it to your destination because the machine wasn't just built to be driven, it was explicitly engineered to prevent someone like you from ever driving it.
The architecture itself is inherently hostile to the new driver.
Yeah, that is the absolute definition of a rigged system. And it perfectly encapsulates the theoretical earthquake that we are examining today. The state apparatus is not a neutral vehicle waiting for a new pilot.
And that profound, honestly terrifying realization is exactly where we find ourselves today as we step into the grand finale.
Welcome, everyone. This is part 7, the concluding chapter of our extensive deep dive into the Paris Commune.
The finale.
Yeah, we made it. We have spent the last 6 parts down in the smoke and the grit and the mud of 1871. But today, our mission takes a sharp pivot.
Because the physical battles are over. Right. The barricades have been shattered. You already know the grim history of Bloody Week. We don't need to retell the story of the Point du Jour breach or the May massacres. You know the timeline. You know what happened with the Bank of France.
We have established all of that.
So today we are leaving the bloodstained streets of Paris and entering the realm of historical theory and lasting legacy.
We're looking at the aftershocks because, well, what happened during those 72 days in the spring of 1871, it fundamentally broke the existing prevailing theories of the state.
Yeah, it permanently altered Marxist doctrine. It forced a violently sudden unmasking of bourgeois democracy. And, it sparked an intense, deeply entrenched war over historical memory that is still actively being fought right now in the 21st century.
It really is.
Now, to unpack all of this, we are looking directly at some incredibly charged, revolutionary political texts today. We are pulling from Karl Marx, Vladimir Lenin, Leon Trotsky, and various contemporary socialist analysts.
Which is some heavy, dense material.
It is. And before we dive in, I want to be extremely clear with you listening. Because these sources contain highly charged political theories, we need to put up a quick neutrality disclaimer. We are acting solely as impartial guides here.
Absolutely.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints of Marx or Lenin or Trotsky or any modern analyst. We are simply trying to convey the ideas contained in the original source material. Our job is to decode these texts and help you understand the earth-shattering impact these ideas had on modern history.
Because regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum today, you really cannot understand the 20th century. I mean, the Russian Revolution, the Cold War, or even the mechanics of modern political power, you can't grasp them without understanding the conclusions drawn from the ashes of the Paris Commune.
So true. So let's get into the ultimate paradigm shift, the immediate intellectual shockwave the Commune sent through the socialist thinkers of the time. And I think the best way to understand this is by looking at the definitive text of the era, the Communist Manifesto.
Right. Written way back in 1847.
Decades before the Commune even happened.
Exactly. When Marx and Engels wrote the manifesto in 1847, the concept of the state was handled in a highly abstract, almost theoretical manner.
It's a bit vague, but...
Very vague. The overarching idea was essentially that the working class, the proletariat, would eventually rise up, capture political power, and organize itself as the new ruling class. The phrasing Marx used centered around winning the battle of democracy.
Which implies a sort of hostile takeover,
Yeah.
like a corporate buyout.
Yes. The expectation was that you just capture the existing apparatus of the state, the ministries, the police forces, the sprawling bureaucracy, and you just wield it for your own egalitarian purposes.
You just climb into the driver's seat of the existing machine.
Right. But then, 1871 happens, Marx is sitting in London, And he watches as the Parisian workers attempt to do exactly this.
They literally take over the city.
They do, and he watches the resulting bloodbath. And this leads to an incredible historical moment that I think gets glossed over way too often. It's June 24th, 1872.
Okay, so just about a year after the Commune falls.
Right. Marx and Engels are writing a new preface to the German edition of the Communist Manifesto. And based purely on what they witnessed during the Paris Commune, they make a correction to their defining text.
And this is huge. Out of all the editions, all the years, this is the only revision they ever made to it, right?
The only one. The precise language they use in that 1872 preface is absolutely critical. They explicitly state that their original program had, and I quote, in some details, become antiquated.
Wow. Admitting they were wrong.
Yes, they were admitting their earlier theory was flawed because the Commune proved one specific, undeniable truth. They wrote, "The working class cannot simply lay hold of the ready-made state machinery and wield it for its own purposes."
The ready-made machinery. There was the rigged machine we were talking about. You can't just lay hold of it. And what's wild to me is that Marx was actively formulating this realization while the Commune was still fighting for its life, long before that 1872 preface.
He was observing it in real time.
Yeah, there is a specific piece of private correspondence in our sources that highlights this. It's a letter Marx wrote on April 12, 1871.
Ah, to Ludwig Kugelmann.
Yes, to a colleague named Kugelmann. Who was he exactly?
Kugelmann was a German physician, and he was a very close confidant of Marx. And in this April 12th letter, the artillery is actively shelling Paris at this exact moment.
The fighting is raging.
Exactly. And Marx writes that the next attempt at the revolution must not be to transfer the bureaucratic military machine from one hand to another, which, had been the pattern of every previous French revolution.
Right. Meet the new boss, save us the old boss.
Instead, Marx uses a very specific German word, zerbrechen.
Zerbrechen, meaning to smash it, to completely shatter it into pieces.
To completely destroy the machine.
So to put this in a modern framework for you listening, it's like what we said earlier, trying to run open source, highly egalitarian software on a proprietary corporate mainframe that was specifically designed from the hardware up to aggressively restrict user access.
It just won't compile.
It won't. You can't just change the admin passwords and expect it to magically run your new egalitarian code. The hardware itself will reject it. You have to physically rip out the servers, scrap the hard drives, take a literal sledgehammer to the routers, and build an entirely new network from scratch.
Because the bourgeois state, according to this revised Marxist conception, it isn't just a neutral container for power.
Right.
Its very structures, like its standing armies, its unelected bureaucracies, its hierarchical judicial systems, all of these were evolved and meticulously designed for one specific historical purpose.
The suppression of the working class by the ruling class.
Exactly. You cannot use an instrument of suppression as an instrument of liberation. It must be physically and institutionally smashed.
Okay, but let me push back on this, because I imagine someone listening right now is thinking about the sheer, terrifying logistics of this.
It's a very practical concern.
Right, because smashing the state sounds, very revolutionary and cool on paper. But in practice, doesn't that imply a terrifying period of total anarchy? If you rip out all the servers, you have no network at all.
Right.
If you completely shatter the entire bureaucratic and military machine overnight, who picks up the garbage in the morning? Who manages the water supply? Who stops a murder? How did these texts, especially the later theorists who had to actually try and implement this, how did they address the terrifying vacuum that smashing the state would inevitably create?
It's a great question, and that logistical nightmare actually became the great dividing line in socialist theory for the next century.
Really? A dividing line?
Oh, massive. The texts we are analyzing, particularly Lenin's foundational 1917 work, The State and Revolution, they address this exact fear head-on. Lenin argued that the reformist socialists of his era, prominent figures like Karl Kautsky, who was basically known as the Pope of Marxism at the time.
The Pope of Marxism, that's quite a title.
It shows how influential he was. Anyway, Lenin argued that Kautsky and the reformists were deliberately distorting this lesson from the Commune out of fear of that exact vacuum.
So Kautsky and the reformists were basically saying, let's not smash the servers, let's just slowly update the software through parliament.
Exactly. They wanted to legislate their way to socialism to avoid the chaos. They argued that the modern state had evolved, that it could now be taken over peacefully through elections and parliamentary majorities and coalition building.
They wanted to completely avoid the violence and anarchy of smashing.
But Lenin, leaning incredibly heavily on Marx's analysis of the Commune, he mercilessly attacked Kautsky for this. Lenin argued that a violent, definitive break was absolutely mandatory. The old machine had to be destroyed.
But what about the vacuum? The garbage collection, the water supply?
Right, well, Lenin was incredibly clear that you don't just smash the state and leave a burning void, that's the anarchist idea. To abolish the state overnight and just see what happens.
Just walking away into the woods.
Exactly. The Marxist idea, as refined by the Commune, is to replace the smashed bourgeois state with a proletarian state immediately.
Instantly.
Yes, it is the instantaneous substitution of a repressive, minority-led machine with a radically democratic working-class machine.
So you aren't just burning down the server room. You are wheeling in entirely new hardware the very next second.
Precisely.
But this raises a fascinating practical question. If the old state machine, the old ministries, the old police, the old parliament, if all of that is sent to the scrap heap, what exactly is the structural anatomy of this new proletarian machine? Because the Paris Commune didn't just tear things down. They actively built something totally unprecedented during those 72 days.
They absolutely did. And the very first decree of the Commune, literally their first act of governance, illustrates this structural shift perfectly. They ordered the absolute suppression of the standing army.
Wow. They completely abolished the traditional military force.
Gone.
Which I guess makes sense if you view the military not as a defender of the nation, but as a defender of the elites against the nation.
That's exactly how they saw it. In the eyes of the communards, a standing army, which is, a professional class of soldiers, completely separated from the general population, housed in barracks, commanded by an insulated state hierarchy. That was the ultimate weapon of domestic elite repression.
It was the blunt instrument used to crush strikes and protests.
So they abolished it, and they replaced it with what the text referred to as the armed people. This was the National Guard, which was essentially a massive militia comprising all able-bodied male citizens.
So the physical force of the state is no longer a separate, insulated entity that can be ordered to turn its guns on the citizens, because the citizens are the physical force.
Right. You can't order the working class to shoot the working class.
Because they're the ones holding the rifles.
Exactly. And furthermore, they immediately applied this exact same structural logic to the police force.
Oh, really? They abolished the police, too.
Under the old regime, the police were the political enforcers of the central government. They were entirely unaccountable to the neighborhoods they actually patrolled.
Like an occupying army.
Essentially, the Commune stripped the police of all political attributes. They were transformed from untouchable agents of the state into the direct, responsible, and instantly revocable agents of the Commune.
Instantly revocable. Let's dig into that. Because this structural overhaul wasn't just about men with guns. It went deep into the administrative bureaucracy. Let's talk about how they handled voting and representation, specifically this concept of universal electiveness and immediate recall, because this is where the logistics get really wild.
It really represented a radical reimagining of how democracy fundamentally operates. Under the Commune, every single official, whether they were administrative clerks, educational directors, or crucially, magistrates and judges, was subject to universal suffrage.
They were elected directly by the people they served.
Every single one of them.
Which honestly sounds like standard democracy to modern ears. I mean, we elect judges and sheriffs today in a lot of places. But here is where it deviates from anything we know. The Commune instituted the right of immediate recall.
That's the game changer.
Right. You didn't have to wait 4 years or 6 years for the next election cycle to vote out a corrupt judge or an incompetent administrator. If they lost the confidence of the people, they were out immediately. But how did that actually work in practice? I mean, how do you recall a judge in the middle of a besieged city in 1871?
It functioned through extreme decentralization. Paris was divided into arrondissements, or districts, and within those districts were hyper-local political clubs and vigilance committees.
Okay, so it was organized at the neighborhood block level.
Exactly. And if an elected delegate or an official violated their mandate or made a decision that deeply harmed the community, these local clubs could immediately draft a petition. They'd hold a localized vote of no confidence and strip that delegate of their authority right there on the spot.
Just fired on a Tuesday afternoon.
Basically, yes. The power always resided with the electors at the neighborhood level, never with the elected official. Marx placed massive theoretical importance on this mechanism.
Loved it.
He observed that the Commune was deliberately not designed to be a parliamentary body, but a working one.
A working body versus a talking shop. I love that phrasing from the text.
It is very evocative.
But if we break that down, what does that distinction actually mean for the day-to-day governance of a massive city like Paris?
Well, think about bourgeois parliamentarism. The systems we see in Washington or London today, you have a strict separation of powers.
Right.
You have a legislature that talks, debates, filibusters, and passes laws. And then you have an entirely separate executive branch that is responsible for enforcing those laws.
Okay, yes.
This separation insulates politicians. A representative can give a grand speech, pass a deeply draconian law, and then distance themselves entirely from the painful, gritty reality of its enforcement on the streets.
They just hand it off to the police and say, not my problem anymore?
Exactly. But the Commune destroyed that separation entirely. It was executive and legislative at the exact same time. The people drafting and voting on the laws were the exact same people legally responsible for implementing them in their local districts the very next morning.
Oh, wow. So they couldn't hide behind the bureaucracy. If they passed a bad law, they had to look their neighbors in the eye while enforcing it.
They bore the immediate consequence of their own legislation.
But again, let me play the ultimate devil's advocate here.
Please do.
Because if every judge, every police chief, every educational official is constantly looking over their shoulder, knowing they can be instantly fired by a popular petition drafted at a local club, doesn't that make long-term difficult planning completely impossible?
It's a very common critique.
Doesn't it just lead to governance by the panicked whim of the mob? Like, if a judge makes an unpopular but legally sound ruling to protect a minority right, do they just get instantly recalled by an angry majority?
It is a highly valid critique, and honestly, it was raised immediately by critics of the Commune while it was happening.
So how did the text defend it?
The theoretical counterargument found in these texts rests entirely on the scale of decentralization. The Commune wasn't a single amorphous mob ruling from a centralized palace.
It was fractured into these small neighborhood units.
Exactly. Because power was decentralized down to the absolute smallest neighborhood unit, and because officials were drawn directly from the working population they lived among, the decisions made were forced to reflect the genuine, immediate material needs of the community.
It wasn't abstract politics anymore.
Right. The Marxist argument is that the fear of the whim of the mob is largely a bourgeois fear. It's an excuse used to justify insulating an elite political class from the people. The Commune's structure was the ultimate attempt to prevent a specialized political class from ever forming.
You weren't a politician by trade.
No, you were a worker who had been temporarily delegated a task by your peers. And if you failed or if you lost their trust, you didn't become a highly paid lobbyist. You just went back to the workbench.
But, to ensure they actually went back to the workbench, to ensure no one clung to power for the perks, the Commune did something brilliant. And this brings us to a decree that the texts highlight extensively.
Oh, yes.
We've talked about the structural changes to voting in the military, but the most effective mechanism to protect this new democracy wasn't electoral at all. It was strictly economic.
There is a specific decree passed on April 2nd that is arguably the most fiercely debated and theoretically significant policy they implemented during those entire 72 days.
The pay cap. They decreed that the absolute maximum salary for any municipal employee or public servant could not exceed 6,000 francs a year.
6,000 francs.
It didn't matter if you were the highest-ranking executive on the Commune Council, a top military commander, or just a mid-level clerk. Your pay was legally capped at 6,000 francs, period.
And to provide the vital historical and economic context here, 6,000 francs was essentially the median wage of a highly skilled Parisian workman at the time.
Like a good mechanic.
A mechanic or a master carpenter.
Let's translate that into modern terms, just so you listening can really feel the impact of this. Imagine if tomorrow a law was passed in the United States legally requiring the president, every single senator, every four-star general, and every Supreme Court justice to make the exact same salary as a local plumber.
Right.
Or a master carpenter, or a public high school teacher. And no outside stock trading allowed. No multi-million-dollar corporate board seats waiting for them when their term ends. No massive representation allowances. No taxpayer-funded luxury travel budget.
It's just a flat working-class wage.
Can you imagine the sheer panic in Washington if politicians had to fund their private jets on a carpenter's hourly rate? They'd be charging the public for extra ketchup packets at the congressional cafeteria just to make ends meet.
The panic would be absolute. because it destroys the very incentive structure of modern politics.
It really does.
It sounds almost utopian, or perhaps punitive, to a modern ear completely accustomed to politicians entering office middle class and leaving as multimillionaires.
We just accept that as normal now.
We do. But from the Marxist perspective analyzed in our sources, this wasn't just about municipal austerity. It wasn't just frugal accounting, because Paris was under a military siege and money was tight.
Even though money was tight.
It was, but that wasn't the main point. It was, as the texts explicitly describe it, a materialist weapon.
A materialist weapon. And a weapon implies an enemy. So if they are capping salaries, the enemy they're attacking must be the greed and careerism that usually infects politics. They were attacking the motivation for seeking power in the first place.
Precisely. The theory posits that the bourgeois state is heavily plagued by parasites. Individuals who seek public office not out of a desire to serve the public, but for personal enrichment, for prestige, and for the highly lucrative perks of the sprawling bureaucracy.
Or grifters.
Exactly. By aggressively and legally eliminating the financial incentive to hold office, the commune naturally repelled the opportunists, the place hunters, and the grifters.
If the job of a powerful city councilman pays exactly the same as the job of a neighborhood mechanic, the only people who will run for councilman are those who genuinely, ideologically want to do the complex administrative work of the community.
It's an automatic filter.
It really is. It filters out anyone in it for the money, because the money literally isn't there to be taken. It forces public service to actually be service.
And Lenin, in his later analysis, he places staggering theoretical weight on this specific 6,000 franc decree.
He was obsessed with it.
He was. He argues that this is the exact moment where a fundamental philosophical shift occurs. He applies Hegelian dialectics here, specifically the concept of quantity becoming transformed into quality.
Okay, let's unpack that. Because quantity transforming into quality sounds like a dense philosophy seminar. How does a simple pay cut fundamentally change the nature of a state?
Think of it like heating a pot of water on a stove.
Okay, pot of water.
You apply heat, which is the quantity. The temperature goes up from 50 degrees to 60 degrees to 90 degrees. It's getting hotter, but it is still fundamentally liquid water. You are just changing the quantity of the heat.
Right, it's just hotter water.
But the moment you hit exactly 100 degrees Celsius, a tipping point is reached. The water boils. It undergoes a state change. It fundamentally transforms from a liquid into a gas. The quantity of heat has suddenly changed the underlying quality of the matter.
Okay, so the water evaporating is the state transforming. Lenin is saying the pay cap was the boiling point.
Exactly. Lenin argues that when democracy is implemented so fully, so consistently, and so radically, when you add the quantity of all these reforms, the standing army is gone, officials are instantly revocable, and crucially, they are paid working-class wages. The state literally stops being a bourgeois state.
The democratic reforms reached that 100-degree boiling point.
Yes, where they fundamentally change the quality of the institution. It transforms from a special force designed by a minority for the suppression of the majority into a genuine proletarian democracy. It becomes something that, in Lenin's view, is no longer really a state in the traditional oppressive sense of the word.
It evaporates into a tool of the majority used simply to manage society, rather than a weapon of the minority used to exploit it.
That is the theory, yes.
But this leads to a deeply tragic pivot in our narrative. Because the communes successfully built this highly functional, egalitarian system. They eliminated the parasitic political class. They ran a massive, complex city on a plumber's wages. They proved, undeniably, that the working class could govern itself without the elites.
And by doing so, by proving their own competence, they triggered an absolute existential panic among the traditional elites sitting out in Versailles.
Right. If I'm a wealthy aristocrat watching this happen, I'm not just insulted. I'm terrified. Because the communards are proving that I'm entirely obsolete. Society doesn't need me to function. Is that sheer panic what triggered the unprecedented massacres of Bloody Week?
It is entirely what triggered it. The reaction of the French state, the government in Versailles, led by Adolphe Thiers, it was not merely to defeat the commune militarily.
The goal was not just to retake the city and arrest the leaders.
No, it was an ideological extermination.
We established the grim physical reality of Bloody Week in previous episodes. We don't need to retell the stories of the shattered barricades or the point-blank mass executions or the firing squads working overtime in the Luxembourg Gardens. We know the history. But our focus today is on what that extreme violence symbolized in the realm of theory, because the slaughter of over 20,000 workers in a single week wasn't just a battlefield victory.
It was a calculated, multi-generational trauma. The sources we are analyzing frame this explicitly as a class war stripped of all polite diplomatic fiction.
The mask came completely off.
Completely. The Versailles government wanted to physically amputate the radical working class from the body of Paris. They wanted to ensure that the proletariat would be so thoroughly terrorized, so decimated, and so traumatized that they would never, ever attempt to govern themselves again.
And it's vital to look at the man leading this, Adolphe Thiers. He wasn't a military dictator. He was a politician, an intellectual, a historian who had served in various governments. He basically represented the liberal bourgeois Republican ideal.
And in doing so, by having this liberal Republican oversee one of the greatest domestic slaughters in European history, the elites inadvertently revealed a dark, twisted paradox about the nature of the Republic itself.
This is something both Marx and later Trotsky point out with chilling clarity, right?
Yes, the paradox of the Third Republic. If we look back at French history up to 1871, the traditional elites, powerful financial aristocracy, the monarchists, the wealthy industrialists, they generally believed that parliamentary democracy was inherently weak and unstable.
They didn't trust it.
They didn't. They thought that to truly protect their immense wealth and suppress the dangerous, growing working classes, they needed an iron-fisted dictator. They believed they needed a monarch or an emperor like Napoleon III to keep a firm, authoritarian grip on society.
But the violent destruction of the Commune proved them completely wrong.
Completely wrong. The Third Republic, a parliamentary democracy with elected officials, achieved what no emperor had ever managed to do. It utterly crushed the socialist threat, decisively and brutally.
It did the dirty work.
The elites learned a profound lesson from this. A bourgeois democracy could be just as ruthless, just as bloodthirsty, and just as effective in defending capitalist privilege and private property as any absolute dictatorship.
The sources refer to this as the violent unmasking of bourgeois terrorism.
Bourgeois terrorism.
The liberal republic was compelled to come out at once in its true character. I mean, look at the historical record. Look at the quotes from Adolphe Thiers himself. Standing before the National Assembly in Versailles as the massacres were actively happening in the streets of Paris, he publicly declared, "I shed torrents of blood."
Torrents of blood.
He wasn't hiding it. He wasn't ashamed. He was actively bragging to the conservative elites that the Democratic Republic was perfectly willing to slaughter tens of thousands of its own citizens to protect the economic status quo.
And that unabashed shedding of blood permanently shattered an illusion that had existed since the original French Revolution in 1789.
Right, this romantic idea.
Exactly. For decades, there had been this romantic, cross-class ideal deeply embedded in French political culture. The idea that the liberal, educated middle class and the laboring, poor working class were brothers in liberty, that they could stand shoulder to shoulder on the barricades, fighting together against tyrants, kings, and aristocrats.
Like Les Miserables. Everyone singing together.
Right. But the Commune proved that the moment the working class stops fighting for abstract liberty and demands actual material economic equality, the liberal middle class will immediately turn the state's guns on them.
The trench between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat was now permanently, irreversibly filled with blood. The romantic illusion of 1789 was dead.
This is a massive turning point in Marxist theory. It cemented the realization that the Democratic Republic is not a neutral playing field where different classes can peacefully debate and resolve their differences.
It's not a town hall.
No. In the Marxist view, the Republic is fundamentally a machine for the ascendancy of capital. And when that ascendancy is genuinely threatened, the Republic will deploy the military against its own people without a second of hesitation.
Which brings us to the second and arguably ongoing phase of this conflict. Because the physical extermination of the communards during Bloody Week was really only the beginning.
Just the first phase.
The second phase, which arguably continues right into our current era, is the intellectual extermination, the war over historical memory.
Right. How an event is remembered, how it is framed in the historical record, and how it is written about in textbooks is almost entirely dependent on who holds state power after the fact.
History is written by the victors.
Always. And the sanitization of the Paris Commune began before the blood was even dry on the Parisian cobblestones.
The press justification for the mass murder is truly stomach-turning when you sit down and read the primary sources.
It's incredibly dark.
The conservative establishment and the mainstream press, they didn't frame the executions as a political purge or a suppression of a rival ideology. They framed it almost entirely as a public health measure.
Medicalizing the violence.
Yes. Listen to this quote from the widely read, highly influential newspaper Le Figaro, published during the massacres. Never has such an opportunity presented itself to cure Paris of the moral gangrene which has eaten away at it for the last 20 years. Let's go, good people. Help us finish with the democratic and socialist vermin.
Notice the specific vocabulary there. Moral gangrene, vermin, cure.
It's extermination language.
It is. By aggressively medicalizing political dissent and dehumanizing the working class, framing them as a disease or an infestation. The conservative press allowed the elites to view the mass executions not as murder, but as a surgical purification of civilization itself.
It wasn't framed as class war, it was framed as necessary pest control.
And the theoretical texts we are reviewing point out a glaring, deeply ingrained double standard in how mainstream history treats these events even today.
Right.
The socialist analysis highlights the stark contrast in how establishment historians write about, say, the February Revolution of 1848 versus how they treat the Paris Commune of 1871 or later the October Revolution in Russia in 1917.
All right, let's look at 1848, because that revolution is almost universally sanitized in history textbooks as a natural, peaceful evolution.
It's framed as the legitimate democratic birth of a provisional government led by poetic figures like Lamartine.
But the historical reality is that 1848 involved intense, violent class struggle and violent suppression.
Brutal suppression. But historians smooth over the violence because doing so validates the liberal bourgeois governments that eventually took and held power.
They gloss over the blood to make the state look legitimate.
Conversely, the Paris Commune and the 1917 Russian Revolution are almost always framed by those same establishment historians as unnatural, highly violent aberrations, as terrifying anomalies that deviated from the normal course of history.
Right, they focus entirely on the violence.
The socialist texts argue that this double standard is entirely deliberate. By erasing the violence inherent in the creation and maintenance of bourgeois states, while simultaneously magnifying and hyper-focusing on the violence of proletarian uprisings, modern capitalist states can claim an illegitimate moral high ground.
They present their own authority, their own police, and their own prisons as natural and peaceful, and any radical challenge to it as inherently, uniquely criminal and violent.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how the sources we are looking at use this exact 19th century framework to critique modern policies. Because this isn't just dusty 150-year-old historiography.
Not at all.
The underlying mechanics of class struggle, the texts argue, remain entirely intact today.
We see this vividly in the contemporary analysis provided in our sources, which explicitly connects Adolphe Thiers' ruthless protection of capital during the Commune to the actions of modern governments. For instance, the texts draw a stark, detailed comparison to the French government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic under President Emmanuel Macron.
And the connection they make there is all about what the state prioritizes when it is under extreme stress. Okay?
Exactly. The contemporary socialist analysis argues that Macron's policies during the height of the pandemic, specifically the intense prioritization of keeping the economy open and protecting corporate profits over implementing strict public health measures.
What critics refer to as a herd immunity approach.
Yes, they argue this demonstrated a staggering indifference to human life. The texts argue that, just like Thiers in 1871, who sacrificed the lives of tens of thousands of workers to secure the republic for the elites, the modern capitalist state subordinated human survival to the profit interests of the financial aristocracy.
Wow. So the theoretical assertion here is that whether it's through the firing squads of Versailles in the 19th century or the overwhelmed ICU wards of a pandemic in the 21st century, the state machine will always ultimately sacrifice the working class to protect the economic engine of the elite.
That is the core argument of these modern critiques, yes.
It's a heavy, deeply unsettling comparison. But it proves that the theories forged in the fires of the Paris Commune are absolutely not dead history. They are active, vital lenses through which millions of people analyze the world right now.
They are very much alive.
Which leads me to a question I want to ask you, the listener, directly. When you look at the political structures around you today, when you look at the multi-million-dollar net worths of career politicians who have never worked a blue-collar job in their lives,
right.
When you look at the insulated lifetime appointments of the judiciary, when you see the rapid deployment of heavily militarized police forces to clear out protests, what are you actually seeing? Are you looking at a neutral arbiter of justice? Are you looking at a perfectly neutral machine that can be safely and effectively driven by whoever happens to win the next election?
The tractor we talked about.
Exactly. Or As Marx insisted after watching Paris burn, are you looking at a bureaucratic military machine whose very architecture is designed from the ground up for suppression, and which ultimately must be smashed?
That is the ultimate enduring theoretical legacy of the Paris Commune. It forces anyone who studies it to strip away the polite illusions of parliamentary democracy and look directly, unflinchingly at the cold mechanics of state power.
It demands you look at the gears.
The 72 days of the Commune proved to these theorists that a completely different kind of society is materially possible. It proved that the working class could govern a massive metropolis, that the parasitic state bureaucracy could be amputated, and that true, radical democracy could function.
But its horrific destruction proved the terrifying lengths to which the ruling class will go to prevent that alternative from surviving. So let's briefly recap the massive theoretical journey we've taken in this finale. We started with the ultimate paradigm shift, the realization by Marx that the old state machine cannot simply be captured. It must be completely smashed and replaced.
Zerbrechen.
Right. We explored the structural anatomy of that replacement, a proletarian democracy built on the total abolition of the standing army, universal electiveness, and the logistical reality of immediate revocability of all officials at the neighborhood level.
Decentralized power.
We unpacked the brilliant simplicity of the 6,000 franc pay cap, viewing it as a materialist weapon designed to destroy careerism and, through Lenin's Hegelian lens, transform the very quality of the state itself.
The boiling water.
We witnessed how the slaughter of Bloody Week unmasked the ruthless, violent nature of the bourgeois democratic republic, proving it could be more lethal than any dictator. And finally, we examined the ongoing war over historical memory and how the sanitization of state violence continues to shape our understanding of present-day crises.
It is an incredibly dense and profound legacy, but I want to leave everyone with one final theoretical puzzle.
Lay it on us.
It's a concept directly rooted in the texts we've explored, particularly those of Friedrich Engels, Marx's closest collaborator. We've spent this entire deep dive talking about the state as a machine for the suppression of one class by another. The bourgeois state suppresses the workers. The new proletarian state suppresses the former bourgeoisie.
Right. In both cases, the state is fundamentally an instrument of force. It exists to suppress an enemy.
But here is the ultimate provocative thought that Engels poses. If the state is fundamentally just a tool for class suppression, what happens to the state apparatus when classes themselves are finally permanently abolished?
Wait. When there is no longer a financial aristocracy and a working proletariat, but simply a unified society of equals.
Exactly. If there's no one left to suppress, what does the machine do? Who does the police force arrest if there are no class antagonisms?
The machine runs out of fuel.
According to Engels, in a truly classless communist society, the state wouldn't even need to be smashed anymore, because it would no longer have a suppressive function. It would simply, in his famous words, wither away or dissolve of itself.
Wither away.
The administration of people, the policing, the punishing, the ruling would naturally be replaced by the simple administration of things, managing logistics, resources, and production. The coercive machine of the state would cease to exist entirely because it would be entirely obsolete.
A complex modern society completely without a state. It's a staggering concept to try and wrap your mind around, especially living in the heavily governed, highly policed world we do today.
It's a completely different paradigm.
And with that lingering thought, we come to the end of our journey. Thank you for joining us on this epic 7-part deep dive into the Paris Commune. We hope it has challenged you, surprised you, and perhaps permanently changed the way you look at the political machinery of our own time. Because the next time you look at that massive, imposing machine of the state, you might just wonder who built the steering wheel and who really controls the brakes. Keep questioning the historical narratives you're handed, and always look for the hidden mechanics of power in the world around you. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.